Hello, Design 10 students. Welcome to another video in our series on your design workbook and your design projects. Today, we're looking at phase 3, which is the prototyping phase. And this phase is the longest section of any design process. It's the bulk of the actual work. And it is the pathway that leads you from just initial ideas to a finished product. And that's what we're going to cover in this video. So let's start off with that word prototyping and what it means. We've talked about this in class before, but to recap, a prototype is any kind of either crude representation or a little bit more refined version of an idea. But the intention is to have something to test ideas, to test small components of ideas, and to learn more about the problem and about the project as you do it. And remember that that is the key part of prototyping, is that it's about learning and about making mistakes and finding out what those mistakes mean and what you can do to fix those mistakes and how you can move forward with the project. Very, very rarely is your first initial idea the full, complete solution that you end up with at the end. Through prototyping, you'll often find little mistakes or errors in judgment from your initial idea. And by doing things quickly and crudely in the prototyping phase, you're not wasting too much time or energy finding those errors. If you were to instead jump right in with an idea and try and make a finished, polished product based on that idea, that's going to take a lot of time and energy to make that product, only to find that maybe there are these little errors that you missed when you came up with the idea. So we save time and energy through prototyping, but we also allow ourselves the ability to just get a better idea in the end. Maybe the idea that you start with is fine, and maybe there aren't any glaring issues or problems, but maybe through prototyping, you stumble upon a different way of doing something, a better way of doing something that you wouldn't have found if you had just made it the first way. And prototyping is a key part of the design process, regardless of what area of design you're engaging in. In visual communication or graphic design, we'll often start with sketches, quick mock-ups, even in software, just some quick, boxes in different places and pictures that haven't been edited, just to get a sense of the feel of the document. We might try a bunch of different styles of typography to see what fits best. And we might even have a number of different possible versions of a finished product that we then would bring to the client or bring to other people for feedback before settling on one of them and then really finalizing and refining that version. On the other hand, in engineering design, prototyping is just as important. If you're designing a part or a product or a machine, we're really talking about time commitment, money commitment, materials commitment to making the finished product. So taking the time to develop some really quick and crude prototypes will help you find those errors before you invest money and materials and time into like machining a part out of metal or printing it on a 3D printer or wasting material in the laser. So we'll often talk about making prototypes out of just like cardboard and tape if it's a physical thing. Something that allows us to get a sense of the physical connections and make sure that it's going to work the way we think it will work in our heads or in our sketches, and then move on to actually thinking about how to make it out of the proper materials. We can also think about prototyping in software like CAD. And if you've started looking at all at the Fusion 360 and those tutorials in Lynda, that's a great platform, not only for making a finished, refined product that you would then bring to a 3D printer or some other manufacturer, but also for doing quick prototyping work. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. But first, let's take a look at your workbook and talk about a bit of the flow and the cycle of the prototyping phase and how I want you to be recording your work so that I have evidence of that and you have a nice record of your own process. So here's your workbook. This is the last section that I have entered in here. And we're talking about the prototyping testing phase. And here it is all about cycles. The whole design process itself is one big cycle, but within it, when we get to the prototyping section, you can think of that as its own little mini cycle. In here, we're going to start off by making a prototype. We've selected an idea from our brainstorming that we think is feasible or viable. The one that, after looking at all of our ideas, is the one that's jumping out as, hey, I think that might be a good one to pursue. Maybe you got some feedback, maybe you talked to some other people, maybe you talked to the audience, or maybe you just sat and thought about what's better. Maybe you made a pro and con list. However you decided on which idea to actually pursue, that's what you're going to start by making a prototype with. And you should start as simply and as crudely as possible. This could be a sketch or a quick cardboard model, but you want to start quick and crude. Then you test the prototype or you get feedback on the prototype. So is it accomplishing what it needs to accomplish, given that it's just a crude representation of it? So with the understanding that it is not polished and not everything is quite working the way it will in the finished product, what can you actually test about your idea with this prototype? And that's an important thing to consider when you're making the prototype or planning the prototype, is it should be intentional. You should be saying to yourself, I'm going to make a prototype in this way because it will help me learn more about the project in this way, or because it will help me answer some questions I have. Then answer those questions using the prototype. Based on what you learn about your project, what answers you discover through the testing, you can then either refine the initial idea. Okay, the idea works except for this one little issue, so let's tweak that. Or maybe by testing, you realize, hey, this idea actually is not going to work at all because I wasn't thinking about a pretty critical element. So let's go back to our brainstorming list and select a different idea. And that ability to say, I think this isn't going to work, let's switch, is a really important skill to have in design, and really important to separate your emotions and your feelings away from that decision. It is okay to start over from scratch in design. That is why we do so much work with brainstorming. And that is why we do this prototyping. So you don't invest the time and energy into an idea, realize, oh, it's not going to work, but I already have this finished product and I've spent all this time and money on it, so I guess I'm kind of stuck with this. Instead, if you didn't put much time or effort into a prototype, but it helped you figure out that the idea is not going to work, it's so much easier to pivot onto a different idea. Best case scenario, you just need to make some small tweaks to the idea and you can go back and make a new prototype or maybe a more refined prototype and continue that way. Worst case scenario, you need to find a different idea and work from that. If you ever find yourself stuck, you're saying, I think this works. I'm not sure if I should carry on though, or if I should try out a different idea. Please email me, hop in the office hours, and let's talk about it. And I'll take a look at what you've done and we can talk through this process. Remember, design is a collaborative and a communicative endeavor. So you should be trying to involve other people in this decision making, especially if this project is something that will be benefiting other people. You should be talking to those throughout the process. You have a quick and early prototype, explain it to them. Hey, I've just got this quick mock-up here. What do you think about this? And then from their response, you might be able to say, okay, cool, let's keep going down this path with a few minor tweaks. Or, no, they didn't like it at all. They have some different vision. So let's pivot and do something else. And this cycle just continues around and around and around. And the theory is that the more times around this cycle you go, the closer you get to achieving a optimal or the best version of the product. And as you go, you're making more and more refined and polished prototypes that are approaching what the finished product would look like. So you're not just making cardboard model after cardboard model after cardboard model. Eventually you're moving to some more robust materials that you can do some more sophisticated testing with, or to a more detailed CAD model, or to a more complete mock-up in the software in Illustrator or Photoshop. And then you start solving each of those individual pieces and coming up with a finished product. For the purposes of this course, remember, I don't care about the finished product. I don't care if you ever actually finish this and get the thing done that you intended to do. What I care about is that you engage actively and meaningfully in the design process. And that's what these activities are all about. This is the same way that professional designers do all of their work. And unfortunately, all that we get to see as consumers of those designs is the finished product. We see the billboard, we see the TV ad, we see the engineered product in your hand, we see your phone case, we see your IKEA desk, but we don't see the process that those designers went through. And that's a really, really key piece that is kind of missing in our understanding of how things are made. This is why the incredible amount of content on YouTube in the maker realm is so interesting in this day and age. If we're looking at Wintergotten's Marble Machine X project, that's a great playlist to take a look at. and see the process of a design evolve over the course of 2 years. If you watch any of Adam Savage's Tested series, especially his one-day builds where he's kind of figuring out how to make a prop or an interesting thing in one day, you see a lot of these quick prototypes where he's just making sure his ideas or his dimensions work. And it's really excellent to see that process. So keep that in mind. I don't care about the finished product. I care about the process. And to that end, I need you to be recording this process in some way and putting it into this document. So down below here, I've said to please record your prototyping in this document. Include pictures or screenshots or videos, whatever, of your prototypes. If you've got something small working, if you've got some sketches, if you've got some mock-ups in software, take a screenshot, take a picture, whatever, plop it into this document. Also in this document, include some notes about any feedback or the test results, okay? If you've got a sketch or if you've got a mock-up, write in some notes about what you like about it. Do you think it works? What other kinds of things did you experiment with? And then notes on how you will refine or rethink your ideas. Okay, so based on this prototype, I think I'm going to move this picture in this way, or I'm going to actually have the background be like this, or I'm going to construct the frame of this construction project to deal with these forces that are coming in on this way. Whatever it is, just make sure you're keeping note of that. This is useful for me to see, but it's also so useful for you to keep track of what you're doing, keep yourself focused on the process, and also to have at the end a record of this process, because this is so great to be able to show potential employers or registration offices at schools this kind of work. More often than not, your employers and your schools do not care so much about the finished products. They care if you are the kind of person that will put in the dedication and the passion to finding optimal solutions and doing this kind of process. So do hold on to this workbook. It's a great resource to hold on to, and you never know when you want to bring it out in an interview. So keep it close, keep it handy. So I'm going to show you just a few quick examples of what prototyping can look like and how that could lead to a finished product. The first example is a little project that I'm working on right now. Personally, I've got a bunch of empty space in my basement, and I've got 2 young kids with lots of energy who would love something to just climb on and play on and have a bit of a long-term play solution, especially through the long winters. So I'm working on an indoor little playground, playhouse kind of thing. And so I'm going to show you what my prototyping process has looked for that project. So the very first thing that I did with this project is really understand the space and the problem. So we have this big empty space in our basement that we would love to put some kind of a play structure in. But first I really needed to understand the space. So what you're seeing here is a scale diagram of the basement space. And what I did is I went through with a tape measure and measured everything out to very quickly scale it down. A very easy way to do this with a large space like this is I just took my ruler and every foot that I measured, I just marked out with a centimeter on here. So every centimeter in this diagram represents 1 foot in real life. So I didn't have to do any calculations on the fly. I could just very quickly draw this out. Measure 8 feet, okay, draw an 8 centimeter line. And so I drew out the whole space of the room, any static elements, like there's a wall here, there's a big pipe here, there's a sink and some other elements, and there's a set of stairs here. And this is kind of my constraints for this project. The next step is then thinking about, okay, I've got really this space, and maybe it can bleed a little bit out into the middle. So this is what I have to work with. So the next thing I did was a bit more around the ideation. And so I drew out that corner of the room a few times. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4. And in here, just some really quick sketches or ideas of some different layouts of what these structures could be. And included in these layouts, I was measuring things like we have a large gym mat that measures 5 by 10. So some of these have a space in the middle to fit that 5 by 10 foot mat. And again, because of the scaling that I did for these diagrams, it was very easy to draw that in. If it's a 5 foot mat, I just needed a 5 centimeter gap on this diagram to kind of represent where that might fit. This was just to really quickly get some ideas about form and shape and see where that might take me. And then after looking for some inspiration online, I settled on a bit more of a solid idea and drew it right into this version. And you can see that here. So we've got a couple different platforms. There's a slide here, and there's that big gym mat, that 5 by 10. and it fits very nicely in this corner. Now, full disclaimer, since doing all of this work, we've actually decided to put the playground in a different part of the house. So the plan is very different, but I'll post to you lots of update pictures as I work on that. But this is an example of what prototyping could look like. Another thing you could think about doing, if you're working on something that has to do with like rearranging furniture in a room, you could do something very similar to this. Draw out a scale model of the room, and then any of those elements that have to be in the room, that have a set dimension, like a bed or a desk, that you know is going to be in that room, but you don't know exactly where it's going to be. Make a scale model of that out of paper, a separate piece of paper, maybe a different color. Cut it to the right size. Let's imagine this sticky note is the same size as a scale model of, I don't know, a cabinet or a table or something. And then the great thing about this is it's very visceral. I can move this around the room and say, I place this here. Maybe I have another one that is the size of the bed. Maybe my ruler here is the size of the bed. That's a very long bed. But maybe what if I want the bed here and the table here? I don't quite like that. So maybe I want the table like this and the bed over here, or the bed like this, whatever. This is a great way to get really quickly some ideas figured out when you're dealing with physical constraints like this. So here's another example of what prototyping can look like. And this is for a more of an engineering design project where I was working on a road case for our robotics team at my old high school. And I started off with this very quick mock-up in CAD. And once you know a little bit about how to use Fusion 360, making something like this isn't too hard. This maybe took me a couple of hours to make. And just to get a sense of what we wanted was this box that could kind of fold out like this, and then have this top kind of be on like that, and have it be on wheels. And we knew roughly the dimensions. But making this model helped us figure out a few parameters of the idea, how things might fit together, how it might collapse like this and hinge. And from there, we could go on to a more robust, a more complete prototype. And that was this model. So here we have a CAD model that is using 3D models from our actual hardware supplier. So it's everything that we would be ordering in terms of hardware, and figuring out the dimensions of all of these panels and all of these metal pieces so that we would know how to cut things. And from there, from this model, which is fully functional, I can move things around, and I think this comes off too. From here, we could generate the plans and actually do the cutting and cut the thing out. And then we actually did build the piece, and here it is in all its glory. And even this looks like a finished product. Obviously, there's some things that could be done here, but this was itself a prototype. And in fact, the team went on this past year to refine this design and create a new one. And now they have 2 of these. And the goal is to actually make 2 more. And we can think of each one actually as a prototype along the way for the next one. And we're getting closer and closer to a more complete, a more polished version of this idea. So those are 2 quick examples of what prototyping could look like. Those are for more complex and maybe larger projects than what you're tackling. But hopefully that gives you a sense of what prototyping is all about, and you have a good idea of the kinds of things that I want you to be posting in your workbook. What I love to see at the end is just page after page of pictures and videos, but whatever you can put in there, that's great. Once again, if you have any questions or concerns or want to bounce any ideas off me, shoot me an email, message me in D2L, or hop in the office hours, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 2 till 3 in Google Meets. That's probably the best way, because having an actual kind of face-to-face discussion is way more valuable than trying to bounce emails back and forth. Okay, well, take it easy. Have a good one. Happy prototyping. We're going to be in this phase for 3 weeks at least. There's only about a month left in class. And then the last piece we have to talk about is communication as the last step in a design process, is actually communicating out your results and your design. So until next time, see you later, folks.